Welcome, everybody. Herzlich willkommen. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a Florencia. It's a pleasure for me to open this roundtable on partnerships for sustainable development, searching for theoretical and methodological perspective, which we co-organized with our partners of the Universidad, Politécnica de Madrid and the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität, Erlangen-Nürnberg. It's an event organized within the Eelisa network, which was established 2 years ago, and it's a very importantly strategically within the perspective of European University to intensify collaborations on issues of European relevance. It's a particularly important topic for us. We are here at the Faculty of Political and Social Sciences of Scuola Normale Superiore. For us, the study of developmental issues and sustainable environment have become more and more important. We have a number of research projects on environmental issues. We are investing in this area. In particular, we are recruiting a professor in sociology of the environment who will join us in next month. And we are starting a number of European projects on this area. Eelisa as well is a very important network for all our faculties. We are a very small institutions here, but in comparison to most of our partners, but we are very active on these intersections between technology, environment, and society. Now, in particular, the topic I think of today, I think is very sensitive and very interesting. Partnerships. Partnership is become a very popular buzzword in politics in the last 10, 20 years. And it sounds very good, partnerships. You know, we all like to be partners. It's a nice one. But to disentangle what it actually means in practice, the different meanings, the different operations of partnership, that is a very interesting intellectual and research problem. Think of private-public partnerships in many countries for the provisions of public services. Sounds a good idea. You find money and you provide public initiatives. There are a lot of problems as well. In my area, I'm a sociologist of the economy. Social partnership, it sounds fantastic idea. Often it is a way to remove other forms of consultation, social rights, and so on through something a bit vague and a bit undefined. In international relations, think of Partnership for Peace, the NATO and Eastern Europe. How did that end? Not particularly well. So not all partnerships, unfortunately, work well. Why? How? What are the power relations behind? What are the agendas behind partnerships? How can we make them work? Under what conditions? That is something that really calls for events like this, that is international and interdisciplinary reflections, that where different perspectives from different angles of Europe can combine, and different perspective in the world can combine, and different disciplinary sensitiveness and competences can also interact. So I really hope that these 2 days will be useful for the progression of all our agendas on research and so on. They will not remain an standalone event. And I don't want to take much more time because there is so much to say. We have so many interesting guests, both here and online. So the roundtable is open, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
We would also like to invite Supriya Singh. I'm sorry, I never heard your last name before. But yes, the PhD student from VAU University. VAU University is the one that kind of initiated this partnership that started the workshop series. And I would like to invite Supriya now to give a few words about it. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Professor Meardi, Lorenzo, Valera, guests here, colleagues and guests who have joined online. My name is Supriya, and I am representing the Friedrich-Alexander-Universität Erlangen-Nürnberg. So yeah, as rumor has it, but it's also correct, we sort of initiated the project, which is Partnerships Orchestrating Sustainability Transformations. And I don't want to speak on partnerships because Professor Meardi did a splendid job talking about, different kinds of partnerships, but also the limitations of partnerships when it comes to the grand challenges of our times. But what I would like to share is a bit about POST, which is really a baby of Eelisa. So it's supported by Eelisa. We were one of the finalists and the winners of the first round of funding that Eelisa initiated last year in 2022. There's some 22 other projects. Eelisa has 9 partner universities, and the idea is to really facilitate interactions between students and researchers from these different universities. We are very, very excited and proud to partner with SNS in Italy and UPM in Spain. Our colleagues from Spain are here. And what we are really after is understanding the different dimensions of partnerships, how it manifests, not just in Europe, but interestingly, the project has representation from Indonesia, Philippines, China, India, Russia, did I say China? Yeah, okay. So we are a diverse group, and what we realize that there is space there needs to be space to talk about partnerships, especially in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is goal number 17, if you're familiar with SDGs, which talks about partnerships for goals. But like Professor Meardi said, not everything is great about partnerships. There are some severe limitations, which we need to understand. So within POST, we'll have 2 workshops. So we have a workshop here today, but we'll have another workshop which will be hosted by our colleagues in Madrid in March. Do look out for that, because I'm sure we'll also organize a hybrid format workshop there if possible. And finally, we will organize, FAU in Nuremberg will organize a spring school in May for about 2 days, really to get a conversation going on partnerships. So that's how POST is structured. We hope by the end of it, we will be able to come out with some kind of, white paper or, a proper report, because knowledge management is something that we are all very passionate about here, and we don't want this just to be an event. So we do hope some of you will continue to be in touch with us and talk partnerships. So thank you again for hosting this, and back to you, Valera.
Thank you, Supriya. Yes, I guess maybe I just wanted to say a few words as well about the today's and tomorrow's workshops. First of all, I would like to thank our partners from FAU and UPM as well for coming here and helping us organize this, and especially also thanks to the eventee of SNS, specifically the Florentine seat as well, for helping and managing this event. Yes, today we will start with, as Guglielmo said already, with theoretical approaches. We would like to start rethinking about partnerships. Tomorrow will be a more hands-on day, where we will try to deconstruct the theories that we learned today or that we already know, and try to come up with new definitions and reflections on partnerships. And without further ado, I would like to give the first word to Professor Mario Pianta, joining us online for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Meardi. Thank you, Valeria and Lorenzo, and all the other organizers involved in this interesting event. I do think that this interdisciplinary and international exchange are very important. What I will propose to you are a few reflections on how we can conceptualize the issue of sustainability from a political economy perspective, discussing in particular the concrete case of the Italian National Recovery and Resilience Plan. Very quickly, a recap on how do we conceptualize sustainability from an environmental, but also from a social and economic perspective. We can agree that sustainability in environmental terms is associated to the ability of societies and economies of carrying out economic activities while respecting ecosystem constraints, respecting the natural systems operating on the planet, and respecting the possibilities of future generation to live and operate as we are doing now. Therefore, the preservation of nature and the preservation of the regenerative capacity of ecosystem is a crucial challenge. And in our times, this means preventing climate change, limiting CO2 emissions, and decarbonizing our economy and society, reducing our use of natural resources which are non-renewable, containing pollution, limiting land use, and limiting waste. In this pursuit, we have to carry out a number of actions. Today we have in the agenda the need for developing the circular economy with the reuse and recycle of materials. Most importantly, we have to develop renewable energy sources, replacing fossil-based ones and nuclear power. And this is especially important in the context of the international conflicts and the Ukraine war that started 1 year ago, with the tragic consequences in all fields. And also we have to change the direction of our economic and social trajectories. However, we have to combine environmental sustainability with attention to the quality of economic activities, to social justice and political consensus, and therefore the issue of partnership that we are discussing have to take on board fully this multiple dimension of the challenges. In other words, we have to discuss environmental sustainability in the context of social and economic rights of citizens and workers, in the context of inequality that has been increasing in all our societies, in the context of the search for gender, social, ethnic equality in different arenas. The issue of redistribution has been at the core of the 2022 COP27 conference, and so we are talking about something which is really crucial. When we are talking about partnership in this area, we are talking about different actors and who have different strategies and different degrees of power. So in the partnerships, the issue of the asymmetries of interests and power is a crucial one to be addressed from the start of our discussion. We have here conflicting business strategies. On the one hand, firms are looking for continuing growth as usual and using just a little bit of greenwashing to become more legitimate in the context of the debate on the ecological transition. We have some efforts by firms to move to sustainable production, but this has complex economic challenges in terms of research and innovation, development of new products and new services, constraints from international competition, and the search for profits. To what extent this can become a constraint on the ability of business to choose a more sustainable trajectory. On the other hand, within civil society, we have equally conflicting strategies. Sometimes we have local groups defending local interest with a short-run perspective. And here we have economic interest, for instance, to preserve jobs versus social interest to preserve position of privilege or social protection versus environmental interest to reduce pollution or CO2 emissions and so on. So there is a complex distribution of costs and benefits to different social groups, and this is also something which can lead to conflicts within society and political conflicts over the strategies to be followed. On the other hand, with a broader range of initiatives, we have a range of social movements for environmental justice, and Lorenzo Zamponi will discuss them in a little while. And as social movements, they are taking a more longer-term perspective and are bringing in a broader view of collective interest. But again, the interaction between limited focused needs and interest pursuit as opposed to broader collective long-range and social benefits is an interesting contradiction within civil society itself. Therefore, when we talk about partnerships, we have to begin with these asymmetric positions, asymmetric strategies, asymmetries in the knowledge about environmental issues in particular, and clearly a compromise and a clear structure of the agreements have to be developed. In political terms, this calls for multi-level political strategies at the local, national, and supranational aspect, because governments and public authorities of different types have to shape long-term trajectories for sustainability, contributing to global decision-making on this issue, but at the same time, at the national level, there is a need to build a nationwide consensus through democratic processes, which are often limited or skipped away or forgotten about in decision making on major environmental issues. And we will see that this in the case of the Italian recovery plan, for instance. At the same time, the political process has to address the need for local consensus and to sort out the local conflicts about the distribution of costs and benefits of transitions, implementing change with very specific and effective policies. So the question is, are partnership a tool in political strategies, and what is the combination? What is the mix within partnership between these three sets of actors: business, civil society and movements, and policymakers and public institutions? This is an interesting framework, I think, for the discussion we are having in these 2 days. Just a note on the need for talking the same language when we discuss sustainability. For instance, we all discuss economic issues using GDP data and national accounts data, and there is an interesting tradition of building metrics for sustainability, which dates from the Demlie and Cobb work and the work on the Index of Sustainable Economic Welfare, which basically corrects in monetary value the value of GDP on the basis of the destruction of the planet, the depletion of natural resources, the emission of CO2s, as well as the quality improvements that welfare is introducing in society and so on. Just to give you a sense of what is happening in our advanced countries, all estimates by different groups of scholars have been showing that after the 70s, there has been a divide between the trajectory of GDP growth per capita and the trajectory of the measure of sustainable environmental and economic welfare. You see the small line falling in most cases. And there is an interesting research by a PhD student of mine who years ago calculated for Italy the long-term trajectory of GDP per capita and the Sustainable Welfare Index. So what we see is that after 1992, there has been no further growth in welfare in Italy if we take into account the damage to environment, inequality, and social problems of the country. So this is just a reminder that we have to agree on what is the size of the challenge we face, what is the areas which we want to address in this context. Finally, we have also to think about the long-range changes in the world economy that we are experiencing. We cannot talk about this transition without thinking about the transformation at the world economy level after the 2008 financial crisis, the rise of the pandemic crisis, today's inflation, and the major divide between rapid growth in China and East Asia and the stagnation that is registered in countries such as European ones. So let's come quickly to Europe's recovery plan. Europe has had developed in 2019 an interesting project of the Europe Green Deal with a lot of limitation, but with interesting questions. Then came the pandemic and the crisis. The response came with the Next Generation EU program, which was a novelty in European fiscal policy, but also a novelty in the presence of the ecological transition as one of the key pillars of this strategy. This project is turned into national level resilience and recovery plans, which are indeed an opportunity to move to a new trajectory through the large amount of money provided for making investments. In Italy's case, we have 235 billion euros over 5 years, which, however, has been spread along a large number of small projects. And however, 70 billion are formally going to the issue of ecological transition. Others go to the digitalization, education, mobility, inclusion, and health. The majority of this money is public investment, basically funding projects which were already in the pipeline in the past. In terms of firms, there is basically a focus on incentives to firms' activities with little drastic change in their behavior. There is little vision of a change in trajectory, and there is a complete lack of industrial policy perspective in this context. So if we study carefully the current takeoff of the Italian recovery plan, we see that there is a dominance of the protection of vested interest, a continuity with past projects, and no new area of ecologically focused innovation and new activity. The risk of being a lost opportunity is there. Here there is a little bit more information on data. We can come back if you want more data in the discussion. So just to summarize, the key problems which emerge in this context is that there is a top-down process with very little democratic participation, and the issue of partnerships is not really taken up in the sense that there is a focus on old-style state investment or old-style incentives to firms, but very little interaction on searching for new trajectories together, joining forces between civil society, local policymakers, and local business. So very little novelty in the way the governance and the implementation of these projects are organized. Moreover, there is an asymmetry with a lot of support for new demand of digitalized goods or more environmentally friendly goods, but very little effort to develop capabilities to produce them. So the lack of an industrial policy means that there is very little effort to develop new environmentally sensitive and appropriate production capabilities in most areas, from energy to manufacturing to digital services and so on. In particular, very weak position on renewable energy, electric cars and mobility, decarbonization, and on this my colleague Sergio Andreis from the Kyoto Club will add detail to our discussion. there is also a parallel risk of an expansion of military industry as a result of the Ukraine war. A lot of funds are going into this field in all European countries, and the military industry is notable for its unsustainable production systems and outcomes, and there is very little awareness of the risk that we restructure our economic activities in a very negative direction, both in terms of the quality and the dangers of militarization, and also in terms of the environmental impact that military production has. Finally, we need a new trajectory with a lot of innovation, a lot of ability to change what we produce and how we consume, relying not just on markets, but on new forms of organization of production exchange. And here we need new public actors. The role for state firms is now returning. We need probably a public investment bank, and again, the partnerships with the business agreeing with the search for public goals on environmental production would be an interesting trajectory, but we need concrete examples and also concrete models for implementing these activities. Finally, to conclude, the challenges we face in the case of the Italian recovery plan is that there is a need to capture this opportunity for change, to avoid business as usual on the part of firms and on the part of policymakers. There is a need for civil society monitoring of the recovery plan, but also the need for develop new tools for public policy and new models for business. There are possibilities of political alliances, partnership meaning joining ideas and strategies to identify a common agenda. There is an interesting experience on alternative trajectories for the automotive industries, which with the Alleanza Clima Lavoro, the Alliance Climate and Jobs, with trade unionists and green groups working together in Italy. There can be partnership for developing specific business activities or specific environmentally sound products, but we need to integrate more knowledge and resources and increase the democratic transparency of these processes. So, in other words, these are interesting steps. We have interesting opportunities, but we have a lot of hurdles to overcome in order to develop a broad vision and political alliances for ecological transition with social justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario, for your both general introduction and this quick but comprehensive peek into the Italian recovery plan. So just to let you know, the way we thought of organizing this is to listen to all interventions first from our speakers, and then we'll have hopefully enough time for a Q&A at the end. So having said that, I also invite the speakers to be mindful of the time so we can allocate enough space then for the general discussion. And I would leave now the floor to Emanuela Girei from the University of Sheffield. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and apologies for this. I'm Emanuela Girei, and I thank everyone for inviting me to this very interesting seminar. In this brief presentation, I will focus especially on partnership, looking specifically at two different aspects. One is the historical contextualization of the term, and then I would like to share with you some reflections on partnership, looking specifically at international research collaboration. As Professor Meardi and Professor Pianta have said before, we live in an era of the partnership, and it would be virtually impossible to identify a development partner, a development actor that does not employ partnership as in their projects and in their way of working. As mentioned before, there is also an important sustainable development goal, Goal 17, that focuses on revitalizing and enhancing the ability of partnerships to deliver development goals. How did we arrive at this situation? How did partnership become such an important node in international development policies and practice? If we look at when partnership started to emerge in the international development sector, we can see that partnership started to be mentioned in the turn between the structural adjustment programs and the poverty reduction strategy programs. So we are locating the emergence of the partnership at the end of the 90s and at the beginning of this century. There are lots of studies and research that try to analyze and identify why partnership emerged and what partnership is delivering currently in international development. I would suggest to consider partnership as a discursive device that helped multilateral organizations and dominant development actors to address key critiques that were of the development policies of the previous year, the structural adjustment programs. First of all, partnership gave reconnected development with humanistic development that was entirely forgotten in the decades of the structural adjustment programs that, as many of you already know, were mainly a set of neoliberal policies which mainly focused on the market forces for delivering development. And that significantly neglected social development, health, education, and so on. So partnership created a bridge, a discursive bridge with the previous era of development, and rebrought at the center of international development humanistic values that were lost during the structural adjustment programs. A second important aim that was that led the road for a partnership was that during the structural adjustment programs, increasingly there were increasingly critiques regarding the neo-colonial character of development, and this because loans were strictly associated with conditionalities, and these conditionalities were mainly the adoption by recipient governments of the set of neoliberal policies. Partnership gave an idea that such asymmetrical power relationship between donors and recipient country were going to significantly change. And so the term partnership also reminds us about a neutral political arrangement, a neutral organizational arrangement where all the different stakeholders involved could have a say. What we see after 20 years, 30 years of partnerships and the literature that has emerged looking both at empirical and theoretical studies is that partnerships are not working. And there is an array of studies that shows that despite the focus on the partnership, international development in the international development sector, in the international development industry, still embodies and embeds neo-colonial relationship between donors and recipient countries. One of the key aspects, neo-colonialism in international development can be addressed and studied under looking at different aspects. I would like to suggest to look at one specific point, which is the right of self-determination. So one of the key critiques looking at partnership in international development is that they do not have restored the right of self-determination of recipient countries and communities in the global south. Interesting for all of us that work in higher education and do research with international partnership, similar critiques have also been developed looking at research partnership, North-South, South-North research partnerships. And in these slides, I have highlighted some of the key limitations, key dilemmas that have emerged from research looking at international partnership, looking specifically at northern and southern collaboration between northern and southern academics. I would like to focus on the first four, which, as you will see, they are very much intertwined. So research has shown that often research, my research focuses especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, but I think that can be relevant and applied also, can be relevant also for other parts of the world. Looking at research done in Sub-Saharan Africa, there is one of the key elements that emerge is extractive nature. Often the phase of the research that involves local researchers, local scholars, is the empirical phase. And very rarely they have the opportunity to engage with the origination, planning, the identification of the key research questions, of the methodology. So several scholars have highlighted that often Africa is seen as a raw field where to extract data to feed research projects of northern institutions. In this context, there is an important aspect that emerged looking at local scholars, which have been defined in previous research as glorified field workers or ghost researchers. Ghost researchers because often they do not appear in the publications, they do not appear in networking events, and they have been they often are relegated to the collection of data from the field. These often provoke a sense of what has been defined alienation and self-estrangement in local researchers, in local scholars, because they are involved in only in a small part of the research project, and often they are participating in a research that they feel is detached from what local communities would need and would aspire. So there is a gap and chasm between the research objectives and what local communities and citizens believe is important for them. This allows us to touch on the fourth point, which is the detachment from local context. And when I talk about detachment, I'm not talking only about the topic of the research, which is often shaped by the politics and the agenda of the funding bodies, but also in terms of methodologies. How do we implement our research? How we do address our research questions? So on the basis of these key limitations, there are three questions that I think are important, or at least in my experience of cooperation with colleagues from the Global South, I think that asking myself these three questions has been often very enlightening. Whose project? Who has started the project? Who has identified the need for that research project? Whose knowledge? Which kind of knowledge is feeding and serving and informing the research projects? There are, as maybe many of you know, in the last 10 years, there has been an increasing debate on decolonizing knowledge and decolonizing research. And this field of research reminds us that what we consider scientific knowledge is often Western knowledge that has dominated because of the power asymmetry between the North and the South. And the colonial and post-colonial scholars call us to open up our methodologies and open up what we consider scientific knowledge and valuable knowledge. The third important question that we should ask is who benefits from these research questions, from this research project. As I've said, as I mentioned before, often local indigenous researchers do not even appear in the authorships. Often they don't have opportunity to develop their research skills or grow in their academic career because of the ghost work that they do to serve research projects, usually funded and managed by Northern agency and Northern higher education institutions. On the basis of this, because we are all researchers and some of you are also doing their doctorate now, I think that I thought it was helpful and important to share some of the key findings that have emerged from numerous research projects that have tried to address the question, how can we make our research partnership more just? So there is, first of all, the need to acknowledge structural inequality and power asymmetries, which goes beyond our agency. We can be the most participatory researcher, but our work is contextualized in a field where there are power asymmetries and resource asymmetries between northern and southern higher education institutions. And we need to consider how these asymmetries shape and condition the work that we can do with our colleagues in the Global South. It is also important to acknowledge insider-outsider dynamics and to understand the different role that we can play as insider and outsider researchers. There is the need to acknowledge that there are competing agendas and interests, that our research interests or the research interests that our funding bodies are willing to fund not necessarily coincide or are aligned with those of our colleagues on the South. It is also very important to study the context, the history of the context, and the social, economic, and cultural background, because often there are several research that shows that the lack of understanding of the local context detrimentally impacts research partnership and the value of the research itself. Local partnership with local researchers in the Global South cannot be developed in a short term, as often happens. They really need a long-term investment to build relationship of trust and mutual understanding, especially because we are starting from a context that is structured by inequality and lack and asymmetries in terms of access to resources. It is also very important to look to what extent the funding arrangements are fair, because often funding for international research comes from northern actors, which could be the European Union, multilateral organization, or our own institutions. And often this funding arrangement serves more northern actors, northern researchers, northern institutions that colleagues in the South. And it is important to be aware of this and to spend time and resources to make the tweaks that we are able to do. Finally, another important point with regard to which addressed the questions before, whose knowledge and who benefits from the research. In order to create more equal research partnerships, there are plenty of research that shows that an attitude toward co-production that try to overcome the divide between researcher and participants can be very effective. Co-production implies that we work with our partners and with our participants in the Global South, taking often stepping back from our role as lead researcher, or as and that shows our willingness and availability to engage with different knowledge systems and with different methodologies. I've tried to summarize very important point. I hope we will have the opportunity to address some of these issues later on, but I just wanted to highlight that partnership is, as said before, is a nice name. We, as Professor Meardi said at the beginning, who is against partnership? We are all for partnership, but using this term might gloss over inequalities and dilemmas that are on the field. And it is important as researchers, when we start international research partnerships, that we start from the realities that are on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Emanuela, for your presentation. You've indeed shared with us some useful material that will be further working on also in the second day of our workshop, much food for thoughts. I invite now our colleague from PAU, Bantayehu Demlie, to share with us his presentation.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I think my intervention would perfectly fit following Professor Emanuela's intervention, because I will talk about practice. So mostly as working in international development, in both in the humanitarian and development in the strict sense of that practice in Ethiopia. Yeah, that's how I will share my perspectives. So my name is Bantayehu. I'm currently a doctoral researcher at Erlangen-Nürnberg, and I'm part of the research group, the one you see here, on business and human rights, governance challenges in a complex world. That is a new international research project program, and we have researchers, some of them here with me, and we hail from about 13 countries, and it was launched in program, and also with a governing board drawn from scholars in the field of business and human. Our research cover a wide range of topics within this broad field. So my research tries to look at the link between migration and development and the role that business and human rights or the private sector could play in that relationship. But here I wouldn't be talking about my research. So, but you could see some links, but I'll talk about something else. So to start with a contextual background, Ethiopia is, so you see the title is African Perspectives, but it could be too generalizing to say African perspectives. What I would say, I think it's good to be conscious of how generalizable or not our intervention would be, but for sure it is at least a perspective from Africa, because Ethiopia is in the Horn of Africa, a country nearly 4 times the size of Italy. It is the second most populous nation in Africa, following Nigeria, and it hosts the African Union, the UN Economic Commission for Africa. As a result, there is a significant presence of international actors. So be it in the sense of UN agencies, so 28 UN agencies, which is a big number, and also a significant number of foreign embassies, just for the purpose of bilateral relations to Ethiopia, but also in the sense of relationship with the African Union and the broader African continent. With this background, so I structured my takeaways from my experience in 3 terms, in 3 ways. I worked as with UNHCR first, in the field, and then I moved to the capital, where I worked from the donor side. So basically working with the Norwegian and Irish government missions there, NORAD and Irish Aid, in more senior positions. So I was on both sides of the table, I would say, because the UN, from the UN, basically, funded by countries, and then the other side. So but here, so I look at specifically partnerships. When I was working at the refugee camps in Western Ethiopia, in an area called Asosa. By that time, or until like 2016, the way you would do work related to refugees was refugees will be based in camps, mostly around borders, and you see it from a purely humanitarian perspective, and then you have more traditional actors such as a specific government agency, UN agencies, specific UNHCR, and mainly international NGOs, so significant international presence, but limited link with, I would say, with the host communities, with the communities outside the camps, and also with the rest of potential actors such as the private sector and so on. So as you will know, after 2016, there were these new global compacts, the process for the global compacts for refugees and also for migration started, where there is a sense of rethink. So looking at this activity or refugees, not from a humanitarian sense, but because it was somehow realization that it's not sustainable, because the refugees would be in the camps for a very long period of time without a potential for return or integrating to the host community. So with this, there was a launch of the comprehensive refugee response framework, which is part of or the predecessor for the global compact on refugees. And this framework somehow it's interesting because it tries to approach the issue from a whole of society and whole of government approach, trying to look at from a development perspective. So applying a development lens to a humanitarian issue, where you have to somehow adjust the traditional partnership and look at or center the host communities, or look at refugees and the community surrounding as a whole, as a whole, and then new actors. So basically, that's why I titled this intervention "Communities as Partners," and basically, it's with somehow this process that there was a rethink around even looking at refugees themselves as partners. And academia and all sort of those things. So this is in Western Ethiopia, related to my first point. Now I move on to another one, which is my second takeaway. So when I said, when I switched to the donor side, I was part of a mission mostly consisting of development agencies, international development agencies, and we went to a mission in the eastern part of the country, in a region called Afar. It's a very ancient region. If anyone here is a fan of archaeology, it's basically the location where one of the most ancient human remains were discovered. But if you see it now, it's also a unique landscape, because it's mostly arid, and in some areas there is almost, it looks like there is no life at all. So volcanoes and these things. So people in that area are pastoralists. So we went there basically mostly from a humanitarian lens, but when we talk to people there, then you'd find displaced pastoralists, but they would say, yeah, we're pastoralists, we have been moving from place to place, but recently, like we couldn't even, like, we keep going, but we couldn't really find livelihoods. And they point to, in particular, the challenge of climate change. And then as a humanitarian mission, usually start to think, okay, is it humanitarian issue or is it a development issue? And then it turns out that it's more of a development issue, or a more comprehensive issue than, let's say, a humanitarian issue. But since this is also a region that you would consider as a periphery, it was also like a lesson for us to see how, to what extent the idea of development has been centralized even within a given country. So that's my second point, where could somehow think about the extent to which development or sustainable development has been localized, has been decentered so far. Finally, my third point, so which would be, while based in the capital, I had to say the intricacies of international development. So in our context, we have, for example, a strong government, but a very weak civil society until now. And mostly international aid from the UN or from Western countries would come with conditionalities, for example, with specific prescriptions. Let's say, in one experience where you'd, for specific issues, you would have to work with specific NGOs, but you don't have NGOs there. But also, you have limitations, for example, that you shouldn't channel funds to the government because the government would be considered as authoritarian from a Western lens. So then you have to somehow rethink what would you do. And for example, in one example, we have to consider a university human rights center as NGO, which is not an NGO in essence, to do the functions of an NGO. But here, my point is that it somehow relates to the point that Professor Emanuela is mentioning. So aid doesn't come as, or partnership don't develop simply as equal. So the context has to somehow adjust to the prescriptions or conditionalities, but then that speaks to a wider issue. And also by localization, we also, I think, also need to see to what extent local actors are involved. So if I see, for example, an example here in the humanitarian sector from a UN report, you would see here the percentage figures that much of the, for example, the humanitarian activities would be undertaken by international NGOs. Okay, it's not governments, fine, but it's still international NGOs. And then UN agencies, and you will have very few national NGOs. Of course, I'm not here. As I mentioned, there's also a difficult environment for NGOs. I put that caveat, but still, if we look this from what's called the grand bargain, which is the humanitarian version of the SDGs, which was launched following the SDGs. So SDGs came in 2015, and then following that in 2016. So there are interesting commitments related to localization, even a specific target, the use of cash, multi-year funding, so long-term partnership, reducing earmarking, and all these interesting things. And if we measure measure the practice from this kind of commitments, it usually you'll find it short of these commitments. So yeah, I think in a way of summarizing this part, we see increasing focus on humanitarian development nexus, and that's one. And finally, in terms of lessons, I think from here, I would say diversifying partnerships and also thinking about how you actually work in partnerships matters. And lastly, understanding actually what do you mean by even international development, or what do you mean by sustainable. One reflection, like after the experience for me, would be I found an interesting book here, Doing Bad by Doing Good, Why Humanitarian Action Fails. It's a book from 2013, but it really speaks a lot to the phenomenon that I observed. And the main takeaway from this is that state-led humanitarian action is not always the best option. So because state-led will automatically lead to a problem of central planning, a top-down approach with lack of localized knowledge. So in alternative, of course, then what do you do? Then of course, and what makes it development sustainable? And then instead of like outside inward development, kind of reconceptualize development as a process of societal discovery without societal discovery, meaning without somehow putting goal and then going towards a goal, then leave it kind of for the society, or if you are doing it, then engage as multiple actors as possible. That's an interesting takeaway. And finally, when it comes to African perspectives, really it's an ambivalent position when it comes to development. So official positions would mostly reflect what the SDGs or what the traditional development would say, put goals and try to achieve these goals with in partnership with other actors. But in reality, that doesn't come easy, especially when it comes to specific to the partnership. It comes with a lot of other things. So you would find, for example, since I research the development, you have different voices, even I think in the global north. I'm aware of, for example, work scholarship in relation to degrowth. So instead of growth, degrowth, but that's mostly a global north perspective, I would say. But here, in the African sense, there is this concept of Ubuntu. So the concept of Ubuntu would dissuade us from, going for a planned hierarchical process or partnership, but rather see development as human relationship as is, in the sense of community of life and collective agency. But as I said, this is just these are just views on how we really develop, because I think because of a realization that the process is not easily, it's not going as easy and as feasible it should be. But all this is just for food for thought, and the questions remain, and the SDGs have somehow to be revised, and would be wondering or how the next phase, or how post 2030, for example, development or sustainable development. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Marta, for sharing your experience and knowledge, both. So there is a slight change of plans in the order of the presentations. I will invite now Sergio Andreis to take the floor, because he needs to lead us a bit sooner than expected. So Sergio, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. And I apologize because at 5 o'clock I will have to leave you, but either through Professor Mario Pianta or through Fiorenzo Polito, I can be contacted, and we can gladly follow up to this session today. I prepared 6 flash points, which I would like to share with you. Number 1, where do we stand with the implementation of the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals? Because, if we read the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2022, which has been released on last July 7, the results of the analysis is appalling. So it sounds like a failure. I quote, cascading and interlinked crises are putting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in grave danger, along with humanity's very own survival. The report highlights the severity and magnitude of the challenges before us. The confluence of crises dominated by COVID-19, climate change, and conflicts are creating spin-off impacts on food and nutrition, health, education, the environment, and peace and security, and affecting all, including the one number 17, with which we deal today, all of the Sustainable Development Goals. The report details the reversal of years of progress in eradicating poverty and hunger, improving health and education, providing basic services, and much more. It also points out areas that need urgent action in order to rescue the SDGs and deliver meaningful progress for people and the planet by 2030. So this framework cannot be ignored, also in your work. Number two, the reversal of years of progress, writes the report, has made, in our opinion, sustainable development and consequently partnerships for sustainable development more and more like greenwashing. Everything is sustainable, you know, for the marketing. If it's not sustainable, no, it's no good. So even if it's unsustainable in terms of public image, is sustainable. So I would like to warn against this risk of greenwashing. The latest shame we learned the day before yesterday, the appointment of Sultan bin Hamad Al Jaber, CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, to chair the COP28 scheduled to take place in the United Arab Emirates at the end of this year. It's really not to be commented, but since we know what we're talking about now, we will also take action on this. Number four, we suggest that instead of sustainable development and partnership for sustainable development, the theoretical and methodological perspective should be decarbonization. Because this is key to sustainability. Decarbonize is key to sustainability for quick decisions, because the time variable, which is something else that was not mentioned so far, is crucial. We are already late in our future learning and saving. We have no more time to waste. And the substitution of all fossil fuels energy sources with renewable energy sources and massive energy efficiency investments should take place now. It's interesting that in the sustainable development slash decarbonization debate, we know the causes, we know the results, we know the solutions. It's clearly a power struggle, because there are trillions and trillions of dollars or euros at stake. It's not that we know. It's a matter of interest and letztendlich, would my German colleague say, of power balance. Number five, in order to be credible, I believe Partnership for Sustainable Development need to bring facts and work for deep changes globally and nationally, without which sustainable development goals will never be reached. And my second warning, this would not be without a price. This would not be without a price. Finally, number six, the signs of hope, because otherwise, you know, we can commit suicide like the one guy who suicided himself because he didn't want to die. There are answers and positive examples, 4 success stories I would like to leave you with. Number one, the ozone layer depletion. This is very much comparable to the climate change challenge, no? And identifying the causes of the ozone crisis, getting a global agreement, implementing it is bringing results. And the data released last January 9, the American Meteorological Society 103rd annual meeting prove and show this. Second success story, the Fridays for for future climate strikes. The terribly important, this nonviolent, creative mobilization by young people all over the world, which, by the way, brought about also the EU Green Deal, which was referred to earlier. Number three, at the national level, you may know that in Italy we have two giants in the energy field at world level, Eni and Enel. Enel, about 10 years ago, both controlled by the government. The government decided about 10 years ago to change, transform profoundly Enel, and now Enel, as it was before all carbon mega power plants, nuclear, now it's all renewable energies, smart cities, e-mobility, with increasing incomes, by the way. So Enel, the good guys in the Italian energy dichotomy, are doing very well and show it is possible for a world level energy group to transform deeply. We've been asking, we will continue asking that Eni, which still deals with a lot of greenwashing in publicity, but still the core business is gas, oil, does the same. And again, it's a political decision, because who controls Eni is in Italy the Ministry of the Economy, Finance. The final but very inspiring, I find, success story to be reported is the divesting movement, which was starting on the US campuses in 2011 and which has moved. You can read all the updates online. Up to 2 days ago, $40.51 trillion divested from fossil fuels to renewables and energy efficiency. By the way, the first category of institutions divesting are churches. So when Pope Francis publishes Laudato Si, is of course a very high moral call, but it means also concretely trillions of dollars to be moved. Thank you very much for your attention. As I said, at 5 o'clock, I will have to leave you because of there was an invitation, which is like an order, more or less, in this case, from the European Commission. So, but in case anything needs to be clarified or elaborated upon through Fiorenzo and Mario, I'm at your disposal. Have a very successful continuation today and tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you very much, Sergio, and we'll definitely be in touch to continue this important conversation. So we resume the order of the presentations, and I invite Lorenzo Zamponi to take the floor. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, really, for organizing this workshop and for inviting me. I'm an assistant professor at the Scuola Normale Superiore, and as was said in the beginning, I work mainly on social movements, and I've been conducting research now for almost 4 years on the climate action, climate strikes, and in general on the world of collective action related to the issue of climate change. What I try to do today is to provide a point of view of collective action on the things we're discussing today, focusing on how grassroots climate action can contribute to the debate on sustainability and what this implies in the whole discussion of about partnerships we're having today. So first of all, well, all of this is rooted in the research I've conducted in the last few years, so both in qualitative terms in several European countries and in quantitative terms, because we've been conducting protest surveys, okay, since we're talking also about methodologies today in different protest events around Europe. So first of all, how can grassroots climate action contribute to the debate on sustainability? The theoretical base of all these is a literature on movement knowledge. Okay, it was already cited before, the discussion about whose knowledge are we considering and which components of societies, which social actors are we considering as worthy knowledge producers. The literature on social movement knowledge points out the capacity of grassroots civil society actors to produce knowledge from before, to produce information about society which is inconvenient and to and resisted by those above. This is really meant to translate into knowledge that can be then accessed and publicly discussed their social and local rootedness, okay, their backgrounds within specific communities, trying to produce the construction of alternative epistemologies. So not only, of course, content-wise, ways of seeing the world, but also different experiences of reality and production of knowledges. On this presentation, I'll focus on 4 elements, okay, because we don't have too much time. On 4 elements, a discussion on sustainability, and in particular addressing climate change, on which what is happening within social movements, at least from my point of view, from what emerges from my researches, can provide a contribution. First of all, climate justice, okay, and how the concept of climate justice has affects the discussion we're having today. The idea of negotiating the individual and the collective within the issue of climate change, the effects of the emergency temporality, and the whole discussion about forms of action, efficacy, radicalization, and pragmatism. Where, of course, when we talk about the climate movement, we all have in our mind the wave of climate strikes that have been affecting really most of the planet since the fall of 2018, okay, started by Greta Thunberg. But here we are actually talking about a longer movement, okay, that is rooted into the climate marches and into the whole wave of mobilization really developed within the global justice movement since the 2000s and so on. That in several countries have been also trying to build partnership, okay, with already existing local environmental struggles, Lulu struggles, and so on and so forth. Now, one of the main innovative elements of this latest wave of climate action within the history of environmental movement is really this concept of climate justice, okay, this strong focus on system change, not climate change. The idea that addressing climate change needs to take into account the balance of power, the balance of global equilibriums, take into account the existence of internal and global inequalities, and so on and so forth. The idea to keep together the struggle against climate change and a general idea of socioeconomic justice, okay, of making those who had been producing climate change pay the price, okay, for it, and redistribute the cost, okay, of the transition in the most fair and equitable way. By the way, this is something that is still it is dominant within social movement milieu, at least among core activists, but our research shows that even among individual participants in climate strikes and so on, the framework of climate justice have been increasingly popular since 2018, involving broader and broader spheres of the young people that have been participating in the movement. This all happens, of course, within a context in which the discussion about climate change is far from taking into account the climate justice framework as the dominant way to see that. everything we're witnessing in this country in the last few days about the price of gas, okay, can be read through that, okay, trying to somehow mobilize one against the other the struggle against inflation and the cost of life and the issue of climate change. The second element I want to point out today is the increasing capacity of this movement to negotiate the individual and the collective. Okay, there has been a lot of research on the individualization of climate action, the tendency of young protesters and so on, to think that individual lifestyle changes are the primary way to address climate change. Our data partially confirms that. There is a strong focus on individual lifestyle changes within people participating in the movement. On the other hand, this is far from seen in opposition to collective action and to idea of demanding radical political change. Okay, and these movements have been developing a quite advanced way to negotiate the individual and the collective, both in terms, okay, of proposed change, of prognosis for the issue of climate change, and in terms of practices, okay? And here the clearest example is the famous case of the individual self-made science, okay, with this strong role of individualities. You bring your individual message to the square while being, okay, in a shared collective environment. And this, you know, within a context in which the discussion on climate change is still dominated by the idea that either it is an individual issue and we somehow make people pay the price individually for what needs to be done, either it is political and individuals have nothing to do with that. I think this is a lesson that needs to be taken into account. The third element I want to point out is the framework of the emergency. Okay, one of the first things that have been emerging both within the climate strikes and even more strongly within movements and organizations and campaigns such as Extinction Rebellion, Last Generation, and so on. There is this strong focus on the emergency. One of the first demands of the movement was demanding public authorities to acknowledge, to recognize, to declare the climate emergency. Now, this is very interesting from the point of view of someone studying social movements, because the framework of emergency, the temporality of emergency, is usually not considered particularly favorable, okay, for collective action. Usually we know that feelings of hope, okay, towards the future, of a long future in front of you, is mobilizing people, while the pressure of emergency, on the other hand, has proven in this time to be, on the one hand, a strong motivator for protest, on the other hand, to have a strong capacity to accelerate processes of radicalization, of changes within the movement that I'll be addressing in a while. Okay, this idea that there is no time, okay, that humanity is about to face its extinction, of course, has strong impacts on the movement and on society at large. What are the consequences of this? Okay, because there is a strong discussion within the movement on the forms of action and, of course, on their efficacy. Okay, the main form of action of these movements for a long time have been the climate strike, okay, which is an evolution of a mass demonstration, okay, because definitely there is an element of striking instead of not going to school. But from the point of view of the organization of the protest event, this is the attempt to mobilize large numbers of people in order to affect, in order to influence both the public opinion and political authorities. But this is far from the only form of action that has been used. And this logic of the emergency, this accelerating temporality. This idea that there is no time, okay, has been pushing the movements into different direction. And what I want to stress here is that there is no automatic mechanism, in the sense that the emergency temporality pushes the movement to be more radical or to be more moderate. The same logic related to emergencies can bring to very different solutions. It can bring, for example, to investing more on the relationship with representative politics. We're talking about partnerships today, on the logic that since there is no time, we have to work with every possible ally. Okay, and there are cases like this that can be observed in different contexts. We cannot wait for the perfect change. We have to work with what we have. On the other hand, there can be a transition towards forms of direct social action, self-management, sustainable materialism. The idea that since there is no time to be spent on political mediation, on having to do with public authorities. We have to try to do what we can in our small environment at the local level, directly affecting the environment in some way. And of course, there is the idea of, since there is no time, then we have to raise the level of conflict, okay? Then we have to make ourselves more visible. We're talking, of course, I'm talking in radicalization in a very broad sense. You're talking about civil disobedience, okay? Non-violent civil disobedience has been more and more present within climate movements in the last few years. And this is really linked. And if you see the discussion within the movement, it is definitely about the fact that we have no time. If we wait to convince everyone through the climate strikes, to the discussion in the public sphere, etc., there will be no time. We have to produce, to make an impact now, okay? And so street blockades, okay? What has been attracting a lot of media attention in the last few weeks in Italy, with throwing paint in front of the Senate building in Rome. Okay, this form of very visible civil disobedience, and there is a lot of discussion within the movement on that. Okay, should we do this more and more? Okay, in order to attract attention, to create a shared feeling of emergency within the general public, or is this alienated the public opinion too much? Okay, on this you can really see different logics of social change. Okay, a logic of numbers. We have to have the largest possible amount of people, and the logic of, civil disobedience, attracting attention, demanding witnessing, okay, the need for direct change. And there are calls, okay, to sabotage, and saying, since there is no time, we have no time for the slow rhythm of political mediation. So to wrap up, okay, on the one hand, grassroots climate action point out some clear directions for sustainability-oriented partnerships that, at least from my point of view, other actors should take into account. Climate justice, so the idea of keeping together socioeconomic inequalities with the issue of climate change, negotiating the individual and the collective instead of using these polarities one against the other, respecting the coexistence of different forms of action, okay, and somehow making peace with the fact that this change will take place only, in different ways and at different levels. On the other hand, their experiences showed clear challenges for sustainability-oriented partnership. This idea of the lack of efficacy, okay, and a strong pressure of the emergency temporalities, and also the need to find a way to make sense of the emergency temporality, okay, and to provide answer and pathways which are able to make sense of that, to ensure people that things are addressed in a way that takes into account the lack of time. Thanks a lot for the attention.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, for this look at the intersection of social movements and climate and sustainability. And now I invite Marta Pieri from Oxfam Italia to the floor. Very much.
Yes, hi, thank you for having me. Well, after this very interesting and very deep presentation from my previous colleagues or speakers, I will bring you a point of view. I will bring you the description and the framework of Oxfam working with the private sector. I don't know how many of you know what Oxfam, but before going to the topic of the presentation, I wish to describe the framework and the reason why Oxfam is here talking about how to shape a partnership in a transformative way. Oxfam is an international non-governmental organization with 80 years of experience in fighting inequality. And in working for this goal, we have always looked to the private sector as a key player. The private sector is a key stakeholder in building a more inclusive economy, being let's say, a major contributor to national income, and the principal job creator and employer. The private sector provides around 90% of employment in developing world, including formal and informal jobs, deliver critical goods and services, and contribute to tax revenue and the efficient flow of capital. So given the reach, the influence, and the impact of the private sector, Oxfam has increasingly prioritized its engagement with businesses. And in the last 5 years, focused and developed the new strategies to engage companies that leverage and strengthen our innovative right-based programming and approach. So our experience enables us to partner with private sector actors to identify systemic issues that affect business and sourcing. And we try to work together to develop solutions that will enable private sector actors to achieve a transformational change for those people and communities that they impact. So while corporate power continues to increase, which is both a major cause of concern, which is why we campaign against corporate capture and for corporate governance reform, but also force us to look at leveraging that power for good. I mean, meaning looking at the potential step forward that we can take in areas where there are clear governance gaps. Climate change, business and human rights are only example for areas where we can improve goods. We can improve the business community, and so work together for a better impact. So I will try to go straight to the point and just said that as the private sector is a central and systemic actor in development, but is also part of the problem. Today, Oxfam has launched is a yearly report of inequality during Davos forum. And well, private sector is for sure part of the problem on inequality. So how we try to manage this complicated approach? I mean, Oxfam doesn't want to reinforce the private sector, to give space and voice the private sector from one hand, but on the other hand, we need absolutely to have private sector on the table when we discuss solution for a radically better world. So we have started to experiment a multifaceted approach to interaction with the private sector. So we seek to engage with companies in a positive spirit of open collaboration to assist business to work in a ways which enable people to realize their rights. But Oxfam will also strongly challenge action that threaten the well-being of poor and vulnerable people and communities, and will for sure lobby to ensure that legal obligation and standard and met and code of conduct are strong and enforced. This is a quote for our private sector framework and strategy. So what does it mean in concrete? It means that for us, given that there are for sure some prohibited sector, and I will show you which they are. But looking at the private sector, looking at the business communities, there's no problem on where they start from. So the problem is not the position, but the key point is the partner's direction of travel. So looking at the scheme, we used to categorize the business and corporates from where exact point they belong to, they start to work, but the most important things that we evaluate is their willingness to move from their point on forward. So their approach to change. Obviously, our way of working really reflects the intention and the approach that different companies have on their approach to change. Those are some examples of transformative partnership we are in this moment working on. And so let's see the majority middle and leaders are the one we look with some hope, and we encourage to change the business model for good. So as I said, going to the definition of transformative partnership, because it's something that I would like to share with you. All of you maybe are quite familiar with the transactional partnership definition that are those partnership typically where a company donates money. So it's more than philanthropy, because goods or services are really useful for Oxfam, for activities, for pursuing our mission. But activities that we carry on together do not have the aim to change the way the company itself does business. So the partnership is not the target of influencing the way company itself implement their business model. On the other hand, transformative partnership aim to impact on the business operation and supply chain of a company, and has the specific target of address its negative business impact in a collaborative, co-creating way. So transformative partnerships are grounded in policy commitment and can help define and model what good could look like for business. So the following typologies proposed, obviously, is not a fixed scheme. It's a flexible one, but if we look at the y-axis as the increase of relationship, focus on the partnership, focus on core business issues and supply chain, from the less to the more focus on supply chain, and the x-axis the industry, the material industries for Oxfam. I mean, we have some industries that are more material than other. This speaks to this. This variable speaks to the extent to which a company's core business impact on Oxfam change objective, mission, or strategy or not. For example, sector like agribusiness are really material to Oxfam because they're really close to our mission. For example, an hotel chain are really not material for Oxfam mission. So using the X and the Y axis, we can plot out Oxfam partnership in 4 quadrants. As I said, please note that it is a row typology, and partnership will not fit neatly in one category or other forever, might get element of several boxes and can move from one to another in their lifetime. So I don't know if it's enough clear about this scheme, and so I would like to share with you an example of transformative partnership. Please, I mentioned at the beginning the fact that Oxfam is working with the private sector, and I only mentioned the fact that there are prohibit sector. For sure, prohibit arm, pornography, tobacco, and companies and parent company listed in UN database on business enterprise involved in the occupied Palestinian territory. So there are for sure kind sectors and list of companies we are not working with for granted. So I would like to share with you an example of transformative partnership. That is the flag partnership we have here in Italy. Obviously, each country have its own flag partnership. This is one with an Italian-based multinational company that is Bolton Group. Bolton Group is the owner of brand like Rio Mare, so maybe most of you will know it, will have its product on your table. But what's the focus of our partnership with this company? That is, well, we come to agribusiness, we come to food sector that is really material to Oxfam, especially a supply chain like the tuna supply chain that is very, very critical one. So what's the baseline of the partnership and the target? We are working together in a 4-year partnership to develop fully and deep dive human right impact assessment. A human right impact assessment is a methodology that works within the framework of the human right due diligence, that works within the framework of the UN guidance principles on business and human rights. So we have been charged by Bolton to assess the real risk and potential risk on human rights within the entire supply chain on tuna, especially on tuna, canned tuna, in different countries. So in Ecuador, in Indonesia, in Morocco, and Solomon Island. So we are actually, but result is not going to be shared publicly before next month. We have finalized the first human rights impact assessment in Ecuador. We have developed the policy guideline and the human rights policy of the entire Bolton Food and Bolton Group companies, try to challenge the company to have higher and higher target in respecting human rights. So, as I said, the new human rights policies is aligned with the best existing international standard. We are going to define the grievance mechanism. The grievance mechanism is a mechanism is also considered in the framework of the UN guiding principles. So this is something that company will face with looking to the new human rights due diligence directive, European directive. So that's it. This is a really important example on how we work with private sector challenging to have a really looking forward policies and practices to respect human rights. Oxfam from our side has a strong experience in all the countries in the world, I would say, and bringing the fragile part of the society on the table in order to make their voice listen. So this is a really good example on how we can bring to the board of directors table of Bolton Group the voice of local communities strongly impacted on fishing system and food processing plant. I would not go more in deep because of the time, so I will leave the floor to Lorenzo.
Thanks a lot, Marta, for your presentation. And last but not least, the word goes to Domenico Villano from Fondazione Finanza Etica.
Buonasera, buenas tardes, guten Abend. Io sono Domenico Villano, qui rappresento Fondazione Finanza Etica. English. And here I represent Fondazione Finanza Etica. I'm an anthropologist, but I work as well as a financial literacy specialist for Fondazione Finanza Etica, which is the foundation of the first and only ethical bank of Italy. Talking about partnership and sustainability, I mean, I don't know if you ever heard, I think you've heard about sustainable finance. Now it's everywhere. Whatever, I don't know, you open the website of all the banks in Italy and financial institutions around the world, and you will find some mountains, flowers, or smiling people, you know? And they will all talk about sustainability and how they are helping everyone get a better living, and the planet. A top manager of one of the biggest investment bank of Germany, who is now involved in a fraud scandal, said in one of the recorded conversation, sustainability, it's a good topic on which to exaggerate. Okay, let's talk about sustainability. So yeah, but as from the perspective of ethical finance, this is not what we consider to be actually sustainable. Like for us, it's always harder and harder to show what's the difference between some organization that really take care of environmental, social, and governance issues altogether as a whole, and companies that think of sustainability just as a new product, a new product for some specific niche of the market. On the other hand, we know that for the transition towards a more sustainable economical system, we need finance. That's why there is this big movement towards sustainability in finance, sustainable finance. And there is the need to create partnership and to cooperate between the financial sector, the public sector, and civil society. to make this transition come true. So let's see what's the state of the art of sustainable finance nowadays in Europe and around the world. In 2021, the two trends in finance were sustainability and cryptocurrency. This is very interesting. Like on one end, the idea of a better finance, which is, or say, more aware of the problems, especially the environmental issues, social and governance less popular among, let's say, mainstream finance, but the environmental issues were quite popular. And on the other end, we could find the most speculative, non-regulated sector in the financial industry, which is cryptocurrency, with no connection to the real economy. And yeah, as you know. So this is interesting. And in 2021, a year of great growth for the stock market, especially the American stock market, the sustainable finance sector reached $3 trillion. This year, in December, went down to 2.2. So we can see that even if we're talking about sustainable products, green bonds, and etc., there is a very high volatility and very big correlation with, let's say, mainstream assets. Anyway, it is a good sign. It's a good sign. It means that people, investors, institutional investors are really interested in the topic. And they are, let's say, focusing their energy and their money into this sector. But at the same time, one could be surprised to know that some of the most prominent ESG index funds, so we're talking about passive funds, include in their portfolios companies involved in these activities. I will list a few activities. So when I say ESG, I mean, I think all of you know, like environmental, social, and governance, this framework. So we have mining and metal production, fossil fuels, cement production, defense, nuclear energy, and genetic engineering. Out of 30 leading sustainable asset managers, which are part of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, which is one of the most popular sustainable finance initiatives in the world, holds a combined $500 billion in coal, oil, and gas extraction. How is it possible? We're all talking about sustainability. And then it's the biggest financial companies, they still invest in all these sectors. How is it possible? But, well, it is possible because there is no agreement on how to define what activity is sustainable or not. There is a plethora, like a jungle of rating agencies that assess if a company or an activity is sustainable or not. And basically, if you have a company and you want to receive an ESG rate, it's easy to find a rating agency that can tell, yes, you're sustainable. I agree on that. You will pay me and I will tell you that you're sustainable. So, in this way, it's very hard to decide what's actually sustainable finance and what's just greenwashing, because everything is sustainable at the moment. But then when we check what's inside the portfolios, then we find all these companies, also in Italian companies. But on the European level, the EU is trying to do something to change this situation. There is an action plan for sustainable finance. I don't know if you ever heard about it, from 2018. The idea is to make sustainability consideration an integral part of the financial policy of the European Union to support the European Green Deal, which we talked about before. So the main problem is to find some shared parameters that define which kind of investment is sustainable and which is not. Because at the moment, as we say, there is a use of arbitrary criteria, to be honest. But this is possible, of course, if there is a partnership between the European Union, the mainstream financial institutions, and the ones who have been doing this kind of investment, this kind of work since at least 30 years, which is the ethical finance sector. And the problem is that often the European Union is like taking advice from the big ones, let's say BlackRock, just one, on sustainability. Like, why you should take advice from BlackRock on sustainability? It's the biggest investor in coal and oil extraction in the world. Interesting. It's interesting because, you know, there is many lobbies in Brussels and they try to weaken the criteria. In fact, they tried to include nuclear, gas production, and the exploitation of forests inside the European taxonomy for sustainable finance. So then again, everything is sustainable. What can you say? Like, yeah, you're you're extracting gas, but you have solar panels on top of the factories. I don't know. I don't know how we can define that as sustainable. On the other hand, when you try, because I'm following a student that is doing a master thesis on sustainable finance, and she tried to ask some Italian investment bank to have the data on about their criteria, the criteria used to create an ESG portfolio. They will never show them to you. Come on, I just want to know what were the criteria, what were the, I don't know, the ideas behind this number. You gave a number of 65 to this stock. But how did you reach this point? No, there is a disclosure policy, you cannot have it. Why is it secret? Like, you know, there should be transparency of sustainability. And in fact, it's very hard to find this data. And the European Union is addressing also this problem because they want to force companies to have a corporate disclosure, or at least on climate-related informations, and to set standards for green bonds. But from the perspective of the ethical finance, the EU action plan has got many limits. First of all, they consider sustainable finance as a product, just another product that answers to a market request, especially after the Friday for Future movement. There is this request for sustainability also in finance. And so, you know, there is a new product on the market and we want to put some regulation to this sector, to this new product. And many companies would like to start selling this kind of products to clean up their image. It's very good. And also to differentiate. For example, there is a new client coming and he wants the sustainable ESG fund. We have it. Do you want to invest in coal, mining, and defense industry? Oh, we have that as well. You know, nowadays it works like that. Most of the financial institutions that invest in ESG portfolios and that sell ESG products, they are selling also the non-ESG ones. And they are not changing anything about the organization of their businesses. And this is clear, for example, when you think about the S of ESG. So at the moment, the focus is on the E, environment. No one is selling social, I don't know, social ETF or stuff like that. We don't care about human rights because they're not in the agenda at the moment. So we focus mostly on E, environment. We don't talk about, if we talk about governance, then nothing at all, because governance will require, if you focus on governance, it will require changing the way you do business. Transparency, democracy inside the business, participation, inclusion. This is harder. It's easier to call a rating agency, say that, okay, this is green. Yeah, it's green. Okay. And then sell the product. And we see that Also, in the action plan of the EU, there is a very big focus on environmental issues, while issues like transparency, inclusion, the difference between the wages of the people in the board and employees, this is not addressed. And all kinds of social issues, they're not addressed. And from our perspective, like, let's say the maximization of profit as the only goal is not put into question. Like, the idea is also behind the action plan. You keep doing business as usual, but you sell this product as well, sustainable product. While in ethical finance, we think that sustainability should regard the whole business. So the way we treat employees, the difference in wages between the employees and the administrator and the board. For example, in most ethical banks, there is a difference of 5 between the person that earns the lowest wage and the one that earns the highest wage. In, let's say, mainstream commercial bank, this difference can reach 1,000. Let's say the general manager gets 1,000 more, like the salary is 1,000 higher than the one that is lowest paid in the company. So we ask coherence in all of the activities. And we don't focus just on the E. We focus on the E, S, and G, the 3 of them. And when we talk about exclusion of some sector, we think about 100% exclusion. It's not that when you create an ESG portfolio, an ESG fund, you keep, let's say, 1% of coal mine extraction, but it's less than 5 in the average portfolio. No, we exclude that. It's out of our business. And what we think is that finance should refocus their goals. The financial sectors should refocus the goals to maximize the benefit of society and the planet, not just the maximization of profit as the only goal. Of course, also ethical banks pursue economic profits, but it's just functional for this underlying objective that are social and environmental. Because we think that in these times where we need very big transformation, finance should be a tool for transformation, not just, how to say, the audience. They should be central to this transformation. And what we do, and there could be a very good example of partnership. It's one of the activities we do. It's called critical shareholding activity. I don't know if you have ever heard about it. So the idea is to buy some shares of companies we don't really like, and then take an active role in, let's say, establishing a dialogue with the managers of this company to try and change something. We talked about Eni and Enel before, and we can agree with the colleague. As we say, Enel, they are very open for dialogue, for let's say they're working on true transformation. While with Enel, we always have problems because they mostly do greenwashing. Let's think about plenitude, not the rest. And how this kind of work works. So the idea is that we collaborate, we participate in networks and campaigns with organizations from the civil society, and we bring their problems, their ideas, their challenges to the managers of the companies. And in this way, we create a connection between the companies and the civil society through an ethical finance organization. Yeah. So let's say in the end, what we think is that at the European level, but also in the private financial sector, we need to have a real change, not just greenwashing, not just the proposition of another product to make the clients happy, but to change the way we do business and the way we address the challenges of climate change, but also social justice.
Thank you everyone for presentations and listening. Now we will open the floor for Q&A. There are 2 microphones. I'll give them out in a second. And yeah, in the audience, if anyone has any questions, we will gather 2 or 3, and then we will have another round for anyone who wants to answer. Thank you.
And yeah, I just wanted to add, sorry, that people online can also interact, so they can use the Teams function to raise their hands. Also, panelists with other panelists, so feel free to intervene.
Thank you very much for this interesting session. So I really would like to thank Valerie and Fiorenzo for all this organization and all the speakers. I found this extremely interesting. I have a question for Marta, and then maybe I have like 2 questions. One that's more specific and will lead to a more general question, maybe for several of the speakers. So for Marta, Pieri, I was really interested in what you explained about your program of transformative partnerships with businesses. But at the same time, I was like a bit confused in the sense that the way we understand partnerships, I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Teresa Sanchez. I'm from UPM, Spain. So one of the partners of this very interesting project that was initiated by our colleagues at FAO and working together with Scuola Santana. And so we are also working on partnerships. We are researching on partnerships, but overall, we are practicing partnerships, and particularly one in Ethiopia, we want absolutely to talk about with you afterwards. But my point is, we understand partnerships as a bilateral relationship. So what you explained was more like kind of a certification or a consultancy or even a labelization process. And you were acting on cultural transformation of the company, which is, I think, extremely interesting. You were acting like a facilitator or a service provider for a company that wants to transform its culture. But the way we understand partnerships between NGOs and businesses is more like, okay, there is this kind of challenge we cannot address alone, because maybe we are very good as an NGO in connecting with the local communities, but maybe this business can offer something else. So let's join together, let's do something which is different. And maybe through that process, we will transform ourselves. Maybe not so much, but what we will do together is different. And these partnerships, it happens a bit outside the company. So in between outside and inside, that's an interesting discussion. So for us, partnerships is that. When we conceptualize partnerships, we're talking about that. So I was just curious to know what you think about that. And in general, through all those very interesting presentations, I was wondering, what are we talking about? Because Professor Mario Pianta gave us a very interesting overview, but I had the impression that he was more talking about partnerships as a public policy. I was not really sure what he was talking about, so it will be nice to know if we share the same understanding of, and then we were also talking about partnerships for development, which is still another thing. And we were also talking about grassroots initiatives, and then I was really interested in that because we are not a specialist on that. So this notion of system change and climate, social justice in climate change, I think it's going really to help us frame our activities. But then Lorenzo Zamponi was finishing his presentation with, okay, so from everything I said, there are 2 lessons for partnerships, or 2 takeouts. So first, they are not effective. And second, you should really take into account this emergency character. So I would really be also willing to know what he had in his head when he was talking about partnerships, and in which way this research can inform partnerships. I think I was asking too many questions, but in a sense, I think we can summarize my question in, okay, what are we talking about here? Are we really having the same understanding partnerships, and what is the understanding of partnerships of each one of the participants from their point of view?
Okay. Hello, I'm a first year PhD student here at Scuola Normale. And actually, my research has to do with participatory governance and water governance. And I was wondering, thank you very much for all the presentations. They were very, very interesting. I was very interested in the idea expressed by Professor Pianta, that usually the decision-making processes are top-down. So I was wondering if the integration of concepts of participatory and deliberative democracy, and as well as ethics of care in finance and through collective actions, could lead and contribute to democratic innovations in sustainability discussions. Thank you.
Maybe we can start addressing these points and then collect some more questions in a next round. We have enough time, so we can have multiple rounds. Whoever wants can start.
Okay, okay, I will start, Marta. And well, for sure, Oxfam has a really wide spectrum on different shape in partnering with the private sector. The one that I described is a specific one that has the aim to mobilize resources to influence the business model and the approach of the corporate sector. So for sure, there are different partnership for development in which companies give us resources to be invested to solve and address specific issues in countries, in sector, or worldwide, like campaigning for fight inequality, or for fight poverty, or to solve a specific issues in a specific communities. But the transformative partnership are a specific way in which we accept resources because we do not work for free. I mean, our experience, our professional have to be funded, and so we work on a cost recovery basis, but with a real, clear, and transparent contract on which we have several rules to be respected, and the most important one is transparencies. I mean, everything that will be discovered during, for example, a human rights impact assessment, all risk that we detect, all human rights impact that we map have to be reported publicly, but not for a shaming proposition, but for a knowing and showing proposition. I mean, we need to support companies, to challenge companies, to address what we have found, and to react with a specific action plan to solve and react to impact that it caused. So, and because we are working in a stakeholder engagement framework, everything needs to be reported to the whole stakeholders involved. And the only way to do it is publicly and asking company to take commitment publicly to solve problems of critical issues we have found together. So it's true, it's a different way out of the well-known way of working together, but it's a really strong opportunity to influence working inside the board of the company, working inside the mechanism of decision making, influencing directly the strategy and the practices and the policies of the company is a really good way to influence a business model for the well-being of the communities.
Should I answer to the other question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for your comment. I was commenting the implementation of Italy's recovery plan, where the projects that are being financed are largely decided at the central level by government ministries, and little room is left for local authorities, and zero room is left for civil society engagement in these activities. So in this case, we have a model of top-down decision-making on major challenges for which are relevant for a turn towards greater sustainability. In general, of course, you can plan actions where policies has a different approach and where deliberative and participatory mechanisms are in place. But the question is, where is the political strength to force a creation of such policies? What is the balance of power that can empower civil society groups, the organization that Lorenzo Zamponi described, and or local communities to have a greater voice in these decisions where a lot of money is involved, a lot of financial interests that were discussed by the last speakers are involved, and so on. So there is a political challenge to rebalance the power relations between the different actors. And until this effort of political rebalancing is made, it is very difficult that there can be space for what you suggest, that is a more participatory and deliberative model to decision making. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, something about the general question, which is a very important question. What are we talking about here? And on the same page. So yeah, for me, basically what was in my mind was, of course, based on the topic, which is partnerships for sustainable development. Then here, what I tried to look at the nature of partnerships for sustainable development in international context. So basically, how do partnerships look like between a global south and global north partnership, but in a global south context. So yeah, as I tried to indicate, then of course there are issues with the partnership, but also issues with how you understand development. So if we see somehow kind of the track. So we had the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, so which was focused on development only, and then you have sustainable development. And as I mentioned, then development is not a concept that everyone would have a common understanding about. So as I mentioned, there are also like moments like degrowth or post-development, or so yeah, I think it could be ideological. This idea could be ideological, but when we talk about partnerships, I think we can still agree on one thing or have commonality on one thing, which is that whether you are talking about to grow or not to grow, or to make development sustainable or not, what's important would be the process. So the process and the nature of the partnership, which means cannot bring, let's say, okay, we have done sustainable development so far. I think it's time for degrowth. Okay, let's do it. It cannot be like a common. It cannot bring. It cannot bring commonality. But as I said, whether to talk about directionality and so on. So basically, it's inherently about the process, and then in the process, of course, you look at the actors. And yeah, I think for me, there was a common theme that, okay, in partnerships, especially when it comes to development, sustainable development, there is the centrality of the state, and that has its own problems. So if you expand the range of actors, then there is a potential for kind of horizontal partnership. So let's say between private actors of different contexts, or civil society, or even between governments and other actors. Let's say private partnership, like the PPP. So I think that's basically what I understood as central to the issue we're talking about.
Yeah, so we still have some time for another round of questions. And I just wanted to take the chance to, because I see Professor Markus Beckmann as connected. And Professor Beckmann is the responsible of the ELISA network at Power University. So I just wanted to say hi. And please feel free to intervene should you have any comments or remarks.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to listen to you. Unfortunately, I was teaching another class and was only able to join like 15 minutes ago. So I'm trying to catch all the richness of the discussion. And thanks for giving the opportunity, like many others, to attend from far away. And thanks to the organizers and the constructive discussion so far.
So good evenings. My name is Châu Bui, and I'm also one of the doctoral researchers from FAU, Erlangen-Nürnberg, Germany. I have several questions. So the first question may be for every speaker, if you want to contribute. So you already mentioned a lot that the sustainability is really nowadays a lot of companies, a lot of people using it as a buzzword, greenwashing and just try to decorate, but not really something real. So my question would be that what would you like to change to avoid that sustainability just a buzzword? Just a greenwashing. And now I will come to a concrete question. The first concrete question go to Lorenzo. So you were talking about a lot of good climate action, and I do understand and agree that it's really also important to raise the topics, the very important topics about global climate justice. But from my limited knowledge and observation, I think that we are lack of the solution and suggestion from this climate action. So I would like to ask you that what do you think? Is it because from my own opinion, it's really not enough if you just raise attention, raise awareness about something, complain about something, but you don't really bring any suggestion or any solution, then it would lead to nowhere, right? So what would be your opinion about that? And the next concrete question go to Marta, Pieri, from Oxfam, Italy. So for you, I have two questions. Question number one is regarding your partnership. So the partnership between Oxfam, Italy and the business sector. I'm really impressed that, and actually my PhD topic is exactly the collaboration between business sector and civil society sector. And Oxfam is very well known as one of the leading NGO in the world, which really active to work with business. And from that, I would like to ask you question number one: what would the 3 challenges or reason for failure would you encounter or experience within the partnership between Oxfam Italy, or let's say your own experience with business sector? What would be the 3 challenges or reason for failure? What would you like to share with us? And the question number 2 for you is that you were mentioning about transformative partnership and transactional partnership. So until now, or based on your observation, do you have, what is the ratio between 2 types of partnership? Do you have more transformative or do you have more transactional partnership? And if you could give an elaboration or reason for that number, for that ratio. And my last, I hope that I don't go too much question. My last concrete question go to Domenico. So I really impressed and very interesting your presentation. And so you were discussing about sustainable finance, and also even now when we're talking a lot about sustainability and sustainable finance, but a lot of money still go to fossil fuel and other industry which is not sustainable. But my question would be for you is that, you know, at the moment we are experiencing energy crisis. And it's not only regional, it's global energy crisis. And because of the global energy crisis, the inflation go up everywhere. It's not only in Europe, it's also in Vietnam, where I'm from as well. And it's really affecting a lot of people. So, and we also know that even a lot of money are putting on renewable energy, but the product from the energy from renewable energy is not enough to meet the current demand of all the industry. And because of that, we have a dilemma here that, okay, we have the global energy crisis. We also have the high inflation, which affect a lot of people and especially the poor in the world. And we still also want to be sustainability. How would we deal with such situation, such dilemma, and especially from your perspective of sustainable finance? Thank you very much, and thank you to answer for answering very a lot of questions. But thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Giulia, a PhD, first year PhD student here at Scuola. I will try to be as quick as possible. I have 2 main questions. The first one is actually more a general comment, a general question to all the panelists. First of all, thank you all for the very interesting presentation. And the first question regards mainly the fact that when speaking about partnership, even if some of you mention more directly private-public partnership, some of you did not mention explicitly the element of private within partnership, but still I have the impression that when speaking about expanding the number of actors, we need to encounter also the private sphere. And of course, I think we are all pretty aware of the main criticism coming when expanding some aspects of our welfare in the sense of well-being and not only welfare state to private actors. That is, of course, an expansion of another market, an opening of a new market for business and especially for business as usual. So my question, and I don't know who may be more directly connected and in charge of replying to this, is how to deal with this criticism when trying to create a partnership which is really functional towards sustainability, towards sustainable development, and especially addressing what Domenico was mentioning, not only environmental, but also social and governance elements. And my second question is direct to Domenico. And it's basically a reflection on the fact that you mentioned these critical shareholder activities. Of course, I think in a financial like capitalism, we need to take into account finance when speaking about development. We cannot avoid it. And so you mentioned critical shareholder activities and how ethic finance is trying to adopt different strategies. And so I was wondering, we can actually speak about partnership, or it's more a strategic tool that you're trying to implement, in the sense finance is basically making profit out of profit. So like, how can we encounter and face and somehow drive other actors toward the direction of reducing or limiting or limiting making profit out of profit, and so somehow reduce the aspect of profit driven within finance, and if it is more partnership or more strategic, in the sense of moving in the line between hidden and veiled and unveiled, or in the line of what can be said explicitly or maybe not so explicitly. I don't know if the question is clear enough. I hope it is. Sorry.
It's not clear. Okay.
No, like basically speaking about critical shareholder activities, would you consider it, would you define it as a matter of partnership, or more a strategic action to make someone doing what you want them to do, but is actually against their nature to do?
Okay, okay, well, now it's clear.
Thank you.
Can I start answering? Yeah.
I think it would be easier because you got a lot of questions.
Yeah. So maybe I can address first your question about the global energy crisis. It's not a crisis for the energy sector. It's a great year. Yeah, that's important. Like, they're performing really well, the financial market. Yeah. So first of all, we have to know this. This is not a crisis for the energy sector. In fact, they are doing also in Italy extra profits that we should redistribute to the society. Somehow they are trying to do that somehow. But what's the problem? As you say, yeah, we are in a period of crisis. The price of energy is very high. So we have to address the needs of poor people. And at the same time, we have to fight for change and try to build a different world with the renewable energies. We see this dichotomy, this problem, pretty often in the last years. I don't know if you ever heard of the Gilets jaunes movement in France, Yellow Vest movement. It was a very big movement, which started when they increased a bit the taxation on diesel fuel to finance the renewable energy production in France. So actually, there was a big backlash by the civil society, especially the poorest sector of the society, because they say, what the hell, I have to pay more for fuel. I already cannot reach the end of the month, and now I have to pay this. 5 years ago, you told me to buy diesel cars because these were the future, and now you tell me that we have to move to electric. You know, this is a big issue. But I think the point is not that, okay, there are some material problems. For example, with renewable energy, we have a very big problem that we cannot store energy. Energy must flow. So if we produce a lot of energies in some places, then we need to distribute it to the rest of the country or the rest of the region. And often with aeolic and photovoltaic, we produce too much energy, and then at one point, we cannot distribute this energy enough, and then it gets lost. And we cannot store it into big batteries because it would be like polluting maybe even more than with petrol and oil and gas. And at the same time, this kind of energy production is not working 24/7. And we need energy 24/7. That's the reason why, for example, energy produced from water is better, because at least it's 6 months per year, 24/7. So this way, we have energy to give to some regions in Italy. We produce a lot of hydroelectrical energy, and it's a good business. Let's say it's working well. While with other renewable energy, at the moment we have this problem with the storage of energy. But what I would say is that I think at the moment on the national, the EU and the international level, we are not doing enough. Like that's the biggest problem. We shouldn't think that there is this dichotomy, like help the poor live a decent life or invest in renewable energy. This is something that some politicians try to tell, especially the Greens from the right. Let's say, yeah, there is this dichotomy. That's not the dichotomy. And I make you two examples. When finance, public and private finance, decides to actually invest in a sector, and when society decides to change things, we can do it. In 1945, England was destroyed by Second World War, and they were losing all their colonies. So they were dire straits. Like they were in a very bad situation. In that year, the Labour Party won the elections for the first time since ages, and they established the NHS, the National Health Services. So they established the National Health Service, universal cover for health insurance and this stuff for everyone in a time where the country was broke. They were full of debts. Just a few buildings were standing in London, and they created the National Health Service. And it worked. It worked so well that the people that voted for the Labour Party, after 5 years, they were so much, they moved from working class to middle class, and they voted for the right because they didn't feel from the working class anymore. And in sociology, we say that this is like I can say a great result, that their life changed so much that they felt that they belonged to a different class. Same thing happened in Italy. Like after Second World War, we were in a very in a terrible situation until 1949, and then the Marshall Plan came into action. It was a big financial aid plan from the US. Very big financial aid and good regulation. Like this is the good regulation. This was maybe even more important than the first. And Italy in 1985 became the 5th richest country in the world in just 45, 55, 60, 40 years. So as you can see, I think we shouldn't think that this is a problem that we cannot solve. It's a problem that we can solve if we gain the social, how to say this, the power as a society to impose to the governments and to the big corporation to change something for real. It's funny that the country that is investing more in renewables, it's China, like, you know, like, because they decided on their actually the second last 5 years plan that renewable energies and the transformation of the economy is one of the main goals. And so now they're going for it, like, you know, because they have a different way of thinking and of acting in politics, but now they're doing it. So the West should follow and not like doing great meetings in the Emirates and stuff like that, you know, like. And I wanted to address the second question about critical shareholder activities. So my answer is it depends, because with some of the companies we are, let's say, working with or doing establishing this engaging, let's say, it's easier because they want to engage in change. We can establish a dialogue. So in that case, we can even say it's a partnership. I don't know. But with some other companies, it's harder. We already said the difference between any and NL. So with NL, it's easier to talk. With any, it's harder. So it really depends on the partner. But for sure, this is, let's say, a quite radical way of trying to change things. It's a bit like hacking the system, no? Like an hacker of the financial sector. We like to be that, you know? We are very, very small, but we can try to make a change via this action. It's not a sabotage, but it's a way to to change things, I think.
I think Marta had also the question.
Yes, I will try to come back to the questions. The first one, if I well understood, is 3 examples of cause of failure in a partnership, in a transformative partnership. If I'm right, I would say that in our experience, the first and most impressive case of failure is wrong expectation alignment. I mean, if what is moving the decision of companies to make an investment of on their supply chain, mapping the human right impact of their business model in their supply chain, is different of the true one on the very Q one. I mean, to improve. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, my microphone was. I mean, I was telling that the alignment expectation is one of the most critical way and critical cause of failure in transformative partnership. And this is why the reason why we invest a lot of time and resources in strongly align the target of Oxfam and the aims and commitment of companies, because if this is not on the same page, if we are not on the same page, there's no good result that could influence policies and businesses. The second one is the management. I mean, every brave decision and commitment start from one manager at the top of the companies. But if the entire board is not aligned with a strong commitment, the challenge is really hard to influence the policies and the decision of the companies. So this is another point where we invest a lot of time in assuring that all the board, or at least the majority of the board, is really committed to bring the challenge at the end and to publicly take commitment to improve the business. And the third one, I would say that often companies underestimate the leverage power they have in influencing the situation, influencing the rule, influencing the practices, influencing the way things are usually being done. So this is really interesting, even for us, to discover with the companies the strong leverage that they have, given for the market position, given for the product, given for the countries, given from the good relation they should have with the local institution, with competitors, even with competitors, because it's really needed to work with competitors to change somehow the rules of the market. So underestimating the level of leverage power a company has to influence the rules and the ways things are done usually. And the second question was about the percentage. I mean, the budget, or the importance of a transformative partnership within the entire commitment of Oxfam in working in the private sector. I would say that numbering all the partnership we have with the private sector, with companies, 1 out of 5 is a transformative partnership. But if we look at the capacity that we invest in this kind of partnership is somehow, let's say, 60% of our capacities. When I talk about capacity, I mean time, competencies, expertise, internal resources are, 60% of our internal capacity is invested in transformative partnership, because it's a really demanding way in working with the private sector, really, really demanding from our side.
So there was another question for Lorenzo, if he feels like addressing.
Yes, I can answer to that. I like from my research and from what we know from literature, I don't think that the main challenge that grassroots climate actors are facing is the lack of solutions or proposals. Actually, there is a massive production of proposals, also with clear cross-contamination with what have been discussed in other milieus. The main challenge, as I also mentioned in the presentation, is of course the level of power. Okay, and the capacity, since most of these proposals, and this is really a point on which the literature is unanimous, most of the proposals are strongly state-oriented and state-based. Okay, this is a wave of climate action that, differently from previous one, strongly focuses on demands posed to the state. Okay, and demanding state regulation of the economy in the direction of decarbonization. The challenge is not the lack of proposals, it is the lack of capacity to be efficient in shaping state intervention, okay, and in shaping the political agenda. This is the whole discussion within the movement, really, not really the lack of proposals, suggestions, but the capacity to implement it, okay, whether through mobilizing support to the public opinion in order to pressure political authorities, or to directly enter the representative sphere and compete for government, or with more civil disobedience, or calling for more attention, and so on and so forth. And as I've tried also to quickly explain the presentation.
Okay, I think it's 6 o'clock sharp. So I would say thanks for everything to all participants, to our speakers for sharing their time and knowledge and experience with us today, to the public, our partners from Madrid and Nürnberg, our colleagues from SNS and beyond. On a closing note, I just wanted to say that we have an interactive workshop planned for tomorrow that is happening only in person here at the Scuola. And some days ago, we shared a form for people to sign up, but just in case you've missed out on that, or after this event, your curiosity is activated and you want to engage more with this topic, please come to us, me and Valerie, and we will just sign you up for tomorrow's activities. But also in general, if you're interested in knowing more about the post project we're running with Madrid and Nürnberg, and you want to be further involved also in future activities, because as Supriya was mentioning, we have some more activities coming up in spring. Feel free to have a chat with us, and there is money for that from Scuola. So to cover for mobility costs and expenses related to Eelisa, so don't be shy, we can have a chat about that. And thanks again to all the panelists. Thank you to the personnel technically supporting us tonight. And we will be in touch to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.